in episode 8, things fall apart, and then you have to pick up the pieces. So, in this episode, Grace and Anissa are back from their honeymoon. A honeymoon in which Grace got yoked up, by Odell's daughter, and we got Khalil back. We got the painkiller. So now they're back home. And now that they're back from the honeymoon, they've decided to tell the Pierce family that they two of them eloped and that they're married and that they're a couple. So they come in, everybody sees them. They're all like, surprise, because nobody cared. And Grace was just like, oh, they're going to be so angry. And I'm just like, girl, you in a black family now. They always going to be angry. So, but they weren't angry. They threw her a party. They threw both of them a party and they welcomed her to the family. Then at that moment, the police showed up. They knocked on Jefferson Pierce's door and they said that, hey, Mr. Pierce, we have a warrant out for you, to search the premises of your home. And he's just like, ain't nobody coming up in my house. And then the cop did a weird thing. Like he turned around at his boys. And when he looked at his boys, like his eyes lit up. So I'm like, yo, this dude's probably a meta. Jeff didn't see his eyes light up though. So they go inside, they ransack the house, and they start looking for what they consider evidence. Because apparently now the government is investigating into Jefferson because they're trying to say that he embezzled money from Garfield High, for his own personal gain. So they're trying to find things, like things in his taxes. They seized his assets, like they put a freeze on all of his accounts, while they run this investigation. So quickly they're just like, oh, this is, Lydia's just like, this is obviously Tobias Jeff, he's trying to slander your name. And then he's like, well, that ain't gonna happen. But in the meantime, because, Tobias is slandering his name, and because he's out on embezzlement charges, he can't go back to school and be the principal of Garfield High. It actually is Jennifer's first day of school. It's her first day back, and she's still using the cover that she's JJ on her, she's the cousin on her mama's side. Like TC shows up to walk her to school, they go to school together, and then TC's like, hey, since you're supposed to be new here, he was like, let me give you the tour of the school, just to keep up appearances. And then she's like, boy, I ain't trying to do no tour. She's like, I'm the queen of Garfield. And then like a bunch of kids, like they're in the hallway talking about how Jefferson Pierce, set them up and he stole money from their college education and the money that should belong to the kids, and then like this other brother, this new brother, he came out of nowhere, and then he was defending Principal Pierce because he's like, yo, y'all don't even know what the deal is yet. Y'all just turning y'all back on Principal Pierce. And then Jennifer, she thought he was good looking. She thought he was attractive, but she liked the fact that he stood up for her dad. She then goes up to him, the two of them start talking, they start having a conversation, and he's just like, oh, you're new to the school, right? And then she's like, yeah, I'm new to the school. So he's like, all right, cool. He was like, yo, since you're new to the school, how about I give you the tour? And she's all cheesing, and she's like, sure, I'd love a tour. And then TC looking at her like, man, he's like, I just offered you. I feel bad for TC because TC obviously likes this girl. Like he doesn't even care about the transformation, and which is awkward. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But TC, he was shocked. He was just like, he's looking at her like, and then he walked by her. He was like, some thirsty ass shit. And he walks away. And then Jennifer leaves with the dude. Jeff, he gets a call from, because remember a couple of episodes back, that one teacher that was underground fighting because he was trying to put some food on the table to feed his children. And during that whole thing, remember Jefferson gave him the keys to like his dad's house so his family can live in his house until he gets on his feet. So he then, he calls Jeff to have like a coffee meeting, and then he tells Jeff, he's like, yo, the IRS actually put a notice on the door that they're selling your house and they're going to demolish it to make room for, for a hospital. And then, he was just like, oh, don't worry. He's like, I'll find something for you and your family. And then the guy was just like, well, you don't have to, because he said Tobias Whale actually knocked on the door of your grandfather's house and he offered to buy us a brand new house, in a different neighborhood, and something about him building a hospital or whatever. So Jeff was just like, what? He goes and looks into it, and the bank ends up telling him that Tobias Whale basically bought out the like his dad's house. He bought out pretty much all the houses in the neighborhood because he's going to tear those houses down. He's going to tear down that neighborhood and he's going to build a hospital on it. So now, on one hand, a hospital doesn't seem like a bad idea, but then on the other hand, it's Tobias Whale, and he's just like, yo, why is he trying to slander my name and sell my dad's house? So Jeff was talking to Jennifer about it, and then she was just like, well, if he gonna sell the house, the bank got to pay you for the house. And then he was like, yeah. And she was like, well, go ahead, sell that shit. He was like, he said, we don't use the house anyway. And then Jeff went through this whole speech about, he was just like, oh, I want something to pass down to my girls, generational wealth. He was like, my dad owned that house, and it was passed on to me, and I want to pass on the yacht. And I'm like, bro, don't you own a house though? like I understand it's your dad's house, and maybe you wanted the house that you're currently living in, you want to give that to one daughter and then give the dad's house to the other. But he was talking this whole thing. He was like, oh, I need something to leave to my girls. And I'm like, bro, you're currently living in a house that you own. So I didn't really get that, but anyway, he asked her, he was like, oh, how was school, baby girl? And then, she lied because she was just like, oh, some kids were standing up for you and everything. He was like, oh, that's good. And to come to find out, they were flat out lying because, they were actually protesting his ass. So she lied to his face, but it is what it is. So they then go down to, they're talking to Lynn now. She's still trying to do the whole meta booster thing. She's trying to figure out, because remember the Asian girl that works for Tobias, she's still trying to cure, trying to cure her ALS. But because they know she's a meta, they think that she's the one who secretly killed the mayor. So they're trying to test her power to see what kind of power she has so they can actually pin the mayor's death on her if she's the one who did it. So Lynn ends up taking a sample of her metahuman DNA. She makes the serum, but she doesn't want to give the booster shot to herself because, sobriety. So then she convinces Gamby to do it. She gives Gamby the serum. Gamby's like, well, I don't feel anything, and then she's just like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Why can't you feel anything, Gamby? So then like later on, Jeff had TC looking into his affairs. He had TC looking into his bank accounts, making sure that his funds were okay, making sure that there's nothing going on with his personal situation. Gamby walks into the room, and then when he walks into the room, all of a sudden TC's powers stop working. Gamby walks away, his powers come back, and then Gamby shows up again, his powers stop working, and then Lynn tells Jeff, she's like, Jeff, light it up, and then Jefferson tries to use his power, and his power doesn't work either, and then that's when it hit Lynn. She was just like, oh my god, she was just like, Tobias's Asian assistant, her metahuman power is that, she cancels other metahuman abilities, which is why Gamby didn't feel anything when he took the booster shot. So they were just like, this is actually worse because she's not the person that killed the mayor, but if she has the ability to be able to take away metahuman abilities, Tobias has the most dangerous weapon in his possession right now, and they have to figure out how to stop it. Because see, Tobias's whole plan is, and I feel, because yes, he's trying to slander Jeff's name. Yes, he's trying to publicly disgrace him. But the whole thing about buying his dad's house to build a hospital, Tobias wants to build a hospital. Like, Tobias is using Lynn to quote unquote come up with a cure for the Asian girl's metahuman ability. What's going to happen is, well, to cure her ALS or whatever. So what's going to happen is, whatever Lynn comes up with, whatever type of formula, whatever that Lynn uses to cure her, it's most likely going to take away, the cure is most likely going to take away metahuman ability. What Tobias wants to do is he wants to build a hospital so he can mass produce this serum that Lynn's going to create. And Tobias wants to use the hospital to basically take away metahuman powers and metahuman abilities. I mean, the whole thing about building it specifically on the property that Jeff's dad used to own, that's just to take a cheap shot at Jeff and fuck with him. So, but I think that, but to me, like I said, I think that's his plan. They get a shot at Lynn. She's back at the lab. She's still cooking it up in the lab. She's running tests on Jennifer's DNA. She takes a test at old Jen that says stable and new Jen that says unstable. So there's going to be a problem there in the future. Gamby, he was still, he's still messing around with homegirl who's still trying to build these weapons. And I feel bad for her because the girl just trying to live. The girl just trying to make a living and earn some money. And Gamby keeps sabotaging this poor girl's attempt on every turn. He wants, like, the girl built the gun. She powered up the gun. She was all happy. She was just like, oh, well, we finally did it, Peter. And then, he was just like, oh, look over there for a second. And then he changed the lens on it. I'm just like, that's not going, she's going to find out eventually, but it's just not going to end well for Peter when she finds out. But I'm just like, I feel bad for her at this point. Tobias Whale even showed up on television doing a press conference, cheesing and smiling. He brought the dude, whose house he owned on the television. He was just like, oh, we provided housing for this poor black Negro family, unlike Jefferson Pierce, who's currently under investigation for embezzlement from Garfield High School. Then he had his boy go run up on some random white dude because I guess like there's this one guy, he's supposed to be in charge of something, signing over some paperwork or something, and he had his henchman run up on the dude so he can like get a move on what he needed to do for him. Now the bald guy, he's the one who actually killed the mayor because he has the power to move metal objects, and he was the one that shot a bullet through the mayor's chest. Tobias sent the guy down to that other white dude's office basically to scare him and rough him up, but because he was using his powers to intimidate the guy, Gamby got an alert of serious metahuman activity. So Gamby basically then used his satellites. They got their cameras into the room to see what was going on, and then they actually saw the guy in action using the bullet to to scare that guy into doing what he wanted. So now they know he's the one that killed the mayor. It's just a matter of how do we let the world know. But I'm just like, Yeah, I got the footage though. Yeah, I just got footage of this random white dude with metahuman abilities having a bullet float in midair threatening somebody. So I'm just like, what more do you need? But anyway, maybe I'm thinking too much about it. Maybe I'm not. And then finally, Ishmael, Black Kick-Ass, because remember before he got paid, he said he only needed 4 more kills to have 100 metahuman kills so he can get into the League of Assassins. And, he said that, he was going after the Pierce family. He actually ran up on members of the Resistance. There was one dude specifically from the Resistance. He ran up on the guy, had him yoked up in the corner, and he basically killed him because he wouldn't give up Blackbird. So he's tracking the whole family. Grace and Nissa, they end up going into, I guess, like one of Tobias's like hideouts, and they were trying to like hack information from his computer. Just then, Ishmael, he followed them. He shows up. He busts through the door. He runs up on Anissa. He runs up on Grace. Like the 3 of them get into like this huge metahuman battle. And then this was the funniest shit to me of all time, because this guy Ishmael, he done killed 96 metahumans, which means he's faced people with superpowers, flying, disability, electricity, floating, invisibility. He done fought everybody with every sort of metahuman power you could think of. Soon as Grace turned into a tiger, he was like, yo, I'm out. So for all the power that you have, for all the skill and the ability that you have, we draw the line at tiger claws. Okay. And I'm like, he like dipped. They even had an unnecessary long shot of him jumping on his motorcycle and riding off in the sunset. I'm like, bro, like, how you afraid of tigers with all these skills? So anyway, so then, then like Grace and Nissa went back to the sanctum. They were talking to Gambi, and then they were just like, oh, Gambi spilled the 411 on Ishmael, and they're just like, oh, we have to worry, we have to be worried. And they were just like, oh, we should be worried now because this guy could be coming after our entire family. Unless Grace turns into a tiger, then all bets are off. And then finally, TC was home chilling, and then he walks over to the computer, and then there's Khalil. So apparently TC has been talking to Khalil the entire time. TC has been helping Team Painkiller as far as like getting the Painkiller program out of Khalil's mind. And I don't know if TC's telling anybody this. I don't know if, obviously Jennifer doesn't know, but it's weird that TC's keeping this a secret. And now I'm kind of like, is TC going to end up on the Painkiller show? But then, TC and Painkiller, they had a conversation. He asked about Jennifer. And of course, they didn't tell Khalil that Jennifer turned into a different person. But TC did tell him that Tobias Whale is actually trying to slander, Jefferson's name. And then Khalil was just like, yeah, it's all about money with Tobias Whale. He's like, you got to be careful. And then he was like, maybe I can help. And then TC was like, well, you're not a tech guy. I don't think you can help. And he's just like, yo, slow down, bro. He was like, yo, I got Team Painkiller now. So he was just like, yo, let me do my thing, which means Khalil's coming back. And that was it. So thank you for tuning in. This was cool. I'm glad that they reinserted Khalil into the fold. And not only am I glad that they reinserted Khalil back into the fold, they also had his team with them. They had the Asian dude with them. So, they're not trying to pretend like none of this stuff exists. And obviously Painkiller's he's gonna come back to Freeland at some point now that he knows Tobias Whale is involved. I would definitely like to see a fight between Khalil and Ishmael. Like, I'm actually waiting for that. And we're all still waiting for Khalil's for Khalil's reaction when he sees JJ, aka New Jennifer. So leave your thoughts down below. Let me know what you think of Black Lightning. Are you used to New Jennifer yet? Are you still hating on JJ? Jessen King, I'm looking at you. Like, how do you like New Jennifer's performance so far? When does Lala get out of the cement? Let's have a conversation as always, and we'll talk about it. Love you guys. Check me out on social media. Check me out on Twitter. Check me out on Instagram. Also, a new episode of the Tacos and Geek podcast is up. This particular episode, we were talking about anime. I will put a link in the description for anybody that wants to hear our anime conversation, because it's a great podcast. I love talking with all these guys and discussing all this wild craziness. Like I said, also leave a comment below on YouTube for myself. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like. Until next time, for Black Lightning, because the black is back, baby. So for next week's episode, I'm out this bitch.